First, we'll start off by removing the engine cover. First, remove the engine oil fill cap, place it right there, and then remove these 4 retaining bolts. Wiggle it a little bit, pull it up, and set it aside. Another tip is to reinstall the engine oil fill cap so you don't put anything into your engine. So next, you're going to want to remove this radiator shroud. There were some fasteners here. You just twist them out and they come off, but I don't have that anymore, so you lift up and then you lift out. So next, I'm going to remove the crankcase breather tube. That's done by pressing these guys right here and lifting upwards, just like that. Removing the MAF sensor connector, just done by clicking that and pulling that back. Next, I'm going to remove this bolt, and this is an 8mm bolt. Was an 8mm bolt. I don't have that any longer, so you remove that. So these are a 7mm here, and again, this is either an 8 or a 10mm there. So now you'll just want to wiggle this off and then remove this connector right here just by pressing towards the airflow. And you can kind of see how this needs to come off. It's tongue and grooved right here. So you'll want to push that forward to get it off. Next, disconnect the throttle position sensor. Just like that. To disconnect the throttle wire. Mine is broken. So next I'm going to remove the spark plug and coil pack beauty cover. You can kind of see it's hooked on the end there. So you have to kind of pull up, kind of do that and then pull out. Set that aside. I'll then remove the PCV valve connection, just like that. And then I'll go ahead and remove it up over here as well. I'm going to pull this wiring harness out of the way. Just like so. Next, I'm going to remove the EGR valve connector. You want to be careful with this one as all of my connections are brittle. Next, I'm going to remove the fuel sensor connector plug, just like so, and remove the vacuum reference gauge as such. You want to be careful because I've actually had to replace this in the past due to this nipple breaking off. Next, with an 8mm, you're going to want to remove these engine beauty cover support brackets. It's just 2 bolts here and here. Next, you'll want to disconnect this, I think it's an EMF or something. Set that aside. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall these little bolts here just because otherwise they're going to get lost. Next, I'm going to disconnect all the fuel injector connectors, and mine are actually broken, every single one of them. All the tabs are broken off, so I'm going to be replacing those as well. And then you can set your wiring harness aside. I'm next going to remove this little support bracket on the very back of the motor. I'm now going to move on to this side. So same thing, 2 8mm bolts. disconnect the knock sensor connector as well. I'm going to disconnect the evap system vacuum. Next, I'm going to remove this connector for the knock sensor. So again, just so that you can see it, here's this red tab. Pull this back, press in right here, and disconnect it. So I will again remove all the fuel injector connectors on this side, and this one actually has been replaced at some point. You can tell because it's black and it still has a tank prong. So I will then also disconnect the temperature sensor wire, so I can pull this wiring harness just a little bit further, and also disconnect. So you're going to want to get something under here, pry this up, and then kind of pull it out just like that. Next, you're going to want to remove the EGR valve. These are two 8mm bolts, and there is a gasket there as well. The EGR valve is disconnected. There is a gasket in between the EGR valve and the throttle body that you're going to want to get. So here's that gasket right there. Let's see what size this is. This is a, you're going to want to disconnect your fuel line. That's done with a 5/8 quick release line. All right, next we want to remove the intake manifold. You'll want to do this from the center outwards. And I actually have found one final sneaky little connector, fuel on the fuel rail on the passenger side. So now I'm just going to go one by one and remove all the bolts. Now I'm going to go ahead and lift right here. So we're going to disconnect this quick release line, similar kind of like to a PEX line, and get something up underneath it to kind of free it from its home. So now we're going to have to get to the map sensor connectors. Singular connector for the map sensor, not connectors plural. So that's going to be done by pulling that outwards a little bit. It's located at the very back of the manifold. Now we've actually removed the intake manifold. Basically what we're going to want to do is to clean the mating surfaces where the intake manifold and the engine head actually meet. So you can kind of see here that I'm just going to carefully, without getting too much debris in there, go around like so, get the majority of the stuff off. So now we're going to remove either one of the knock sensors. You can see here is the left knock sensor, here is the right knock sensor, and the left knock sensor has this connector, the right knock sensor has this connector. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it. Take note of how the wire was routed. So you can see it's just clearly laid in there. So now I'm going to want to remove this little retainer clip. That's done literally just by pushing up on this tang right here and pulling out. So when comparing the two, you can see the old one actually has this retainer. My new one does not. So I'm going to swap out the connectors. Okay, now once you've installed it and put the nut on hand tight, you're going to go ahead and torque it down according to the factory service manual. You can see here the install is 18.44 pound-feet or 25 Newton meters. So now what I like to do is to press on these prongs a little bit inwards so that they really bite into the side, so that they really stay on there. In my experience, they may sometimes kind of fall off, so it's a whole lot easier to get them to bite if those are tighter. So I'm going to do a final wipe down right here and press them on. Now you'll want to make sure that the bolt holes are actually lined up so that you can actually get the bolts through there. And then on these side ones, you can kind of see, here, come over here. You can kind of see what you have to do here. So you have to actually push that over. See how that kind of goes over? And you do that on the front and the back. And now we're going to do that on this side. Now we are going to lift that guy in there. So you can see I've kind of tentatively plugged this guy in here for now. What I want to do is to first connect my map sensor. So get that guy plugged up. I'm going to install that connector at the back of the fuel rail. Okay, so now I am going to maneuver this guy back into place, like so. You want to make sure that your knock sensor are in place and able to be plugged in. Next is to get these bolts and just plug them right up. Make sure that they go into place. Let's see. Together. All right, so now I'm going to reinstall the intake manifold. As you can see, I've got all the bolts in here. I followed the torque sequence that I'm going to put on screen. So I've got them finger tight now. Now I'm going to torque them down. First, I'm just going to let my electric ratchet do the majority of the work, and then I'm going to get the torque wrench on it. You don't have to record this. So now that I've run those down, I'm going to torque each of these to 16 pound-feet. In that same pattern that I have on screen now.